to the Midseason Replacements podcast. You are listening to episode 66. Lucky number, unlucky number, I don't know. I am your host, Randy Dankovich, the man behind Process Media, and also the man sitting behind his microphone, and a man sitting behind his own microphone. I think I actually can't see it; it's hidden. I don't want to know your Hollywood secrets, Sean, or who's holding your boom mic. But my co-host, Sean Coletti, how are you, sir?
I'm all right. I've carefully hidden a lot of things just below where the camera can see, so I like to keep you waiting. I wish I had exciting things. You have way more exciting things than I do. You have a soundboard. That's really it.
It's the only thing you want.
It's it is, but I wouldn't be very good at it. Is the problem? I'm not. I think with timing and all of that, I recognize when something is funny, but the moment always passes, and then I laugh after the fact, and then people stare at me and wonder what are you laughing about, and it's fine. I've gotten used to it.
So here's a interesting question about motor skills. Would having a soundboard, this is something I've been thinking about. Clearly, a soundboard with foot pedals help you in this situation at all? Do you think your feet would be able to react to comedic timing better than your hand-eye coordination might allow you to be?
That's a weird question, but I think the answer to that is yes.
Great. And since we're biomechanical experts, clearly I lived with in college. My roommate was an exercise science major of some sort. So I think I can speak expertly. And you are a doctor. So I think we've covered all our bases here. And we are now a science pod.
I'll get those pedals ready for next week.
We will spoilers, we are going to talk more about the mechanics of sport. If not in the next half an hour, then at some point over the next 10 weeks. Today, we are going to debut our next fun running feature, covering every episode of Winning Time, HBO's new series about the Showtime Lakers. Anybody who listens to the show now knows how much we love the NBA and its storied history. I just love sports history in general. And this is kind of meets an intersection of things that we enjoy, from old school basketball to John C. Riley with a mustache, to shows that are ambitiously trying to be something of their own, whether that is good or bad. We will debate, um, or just discuss. I don't think we really debate much on here, thank God, because that's what the entire internet is for in 2022. Um, but we are also going to talk about the first three episodes of the second season of Painting with John, which is really just more of a discussion, I think, about Painting with John in general. And just, I'm just going to guess we're going to give some props to HBO for airing series like Painting with John in the year 2022. But first, our new podcast segment, which we don't have a title for yet. The only two that we have thought of are Talking Time and Ball Time. And I don't know, neither one of those really have the ring that I want them to have.
No, I was trying to think as you were talking what would be good alternatives, but I got stuck on the subtitle of the series, which is "The Rise of the Lakers Dynasty."
Another title I was thinking of was Cocaine Cowboys, but that's not really as fitting as I would like it to be. It's more fitting as an episode title because you have a show about the early 80s and also a show that intersperses a bunch of strange cowboy bits, but that's more inclusive to us, I think, than the show. But all titling aside, Winning Time is the latest high profile HBO series that has Adam McKay's name attached to it. As Sean alluded to, the full official title of the show is Winning Time: The Rise of the Lakers Dynasty, which is partly based on the book that Jeff Pearlman wrote. Stars John C. Riley, Jason Clark, Gabby Hoffman, a bunch of other people. Haley Robinson is in this. Adrian Brody is in it eventually, which I'm very interested in seeing. He's not in it yet. And on Sunday, the pilot episode, which was directed by Adam McKay and written by Max Borenstein, and I think the story is co-credited with somebody else, Jim Hecht, who writes a lot for the first season. And yeah, this is the latest high profile HBO series, and it certainly fits in that vein as a show that's trying to, HBO does still have an affinity for period dramas, and it also has an affinity for dramedies that are, in a complimentary way, I will say, tongue in cheek. And this show certainly tries to intersect all of those things and be many things at once. Um, Here's my question to you, Sean. I know I usually answer with the same thing, but I'm going to throw you a curveball this week. Um, can someone make can an episode of television be an asshole? Because the way that this episode is so aggressively directed and colorized, it almost I feel like it overshadows like the really interesting elements of this show, this pilot that work, and it just feels like an asshole directed this pilot. And this is not me saying anything about Adam McKay as a human being. Like I don't pay attention to the dude. I don't follow him on Twitter or anything like that. There's work of his I enjoy. There's work of his I don't enjoy. But boy, do I not like the direction of this first episode.
That wasn't a curveball; it was an alley oop.
Yes, I got to get my sport analogies right if we're gonna really lean into this.
I think it's a good place to start. Style is where I wanted to begin anyway. Just because I don't, if we're going to be talking about this week to week, I don't want it to be something for me to keep harping on. The style is what it is, and I imagine that it will continue to be like this as we go forward. So I guess from here on out, it's just taking that as the case and running with it, and whether or not we like it, it's the show's identity as of right now. It could very well be a case of different directors will sort of incorporate different artistic flourishes, and if that is the case, then maybe we'll have more to talk about than we will. Um, but how these things usually go, that it has set its style. I imagine that this is going to be the style going forward, and it's one that I don't especially enjoy, for one of the reasons
You
that
can just say it's
you
bad. That's okay.
is it
Because
bad?
it's bad. It's bad. I think it's bad.
Well, one of the things that you said that I agree with is how it takes away from some of the other stuff going on. If you want to call that the dramatic weight or whatever it might be, that's fine. But
Fun. Just general fun of being a television show that's enjoying itself.
more so than bad, I think I'd be extremely comfortable saying it's distracting. And that's almost never something that you want in any sort of art unless the point of it is to be distracting. So, in talking about the breaking of the fourth wall, which happens frequently in this first episode.
It's not
Uh,
a breaking of the fourth wall. It's more of a we're going to show you the fourth wall and then just fucking beat the shit out of you with it for the first 10 minutes of the episode.
that kind of verver uh, is attached to the filters as well. So how this is shot goes from one style to another. So you do get whatever the most recent high quality cameras are, but you have that interspersed with a bunch of these filters to make it look like it was directed and shot during the time, which I guess with any period piece, there's the temptation to really show the audience or the reader or whoever it is, whatever art form you're working in, that you've done your homework. And I don't really need to be, that doesn't need to be proven to me in this way, I
Or does
suppose.
it? Adam McKay would suggest otherwise. Um, the way I feel like the pilot is directed, one of my new fascinations with the last couple of years of video games are, these very expensive AAA titles that put in photo modes. And the way this is shot and the way the filtering is used, it feels like somebody put those drunk goggles that you can, like you do when you're doing like your driver's ed and stuff. Like they put those drunk goggles on a 7-year old and then gave him a controller and said, "Here, make a movie with it." It looks like absolute shit. I understand what it's trying to go for. It's trying to intersperse these moments where it feels like almost found footage of like early VHS tapes from the 80s against this very fake filtered grain of, oh, this takes place in the early 80s. But when you are, like you allude to, breaking the fourth wall as not only an like it's so heavily done that it becomes a stylistic choice more than a narrative one. Like it's everything for the first act of this show. It's hard to divorce the two from each other and feel like this show has absolutely no confidence in what it's doing, and that it's trying so hard to set these things up and so desperate to like establish this, hey, we're a cool TV show, look at my finger guns kind of style, that it feels very frenetic and random and undercooked in a way that, again, it feels like a juvenile attempt at making a prestige dramedy. There are parts of this that remind me of, I don't remember the name of it, but there was that show that HBO did, Vinyl, and it reminds me of how that show like really wanted us to like, yeah, man, you're living in this era and we understand this era, and here is every single piece of cultural context, so you like really get it, we're going to explain it all to you. And it filters through how the show's directed, and boy does it make it kind of like really difficult to watch, especially early on, especially in that first act.
At the risk of continuing to beat this horse to death, the thing that really annoys me with something like this is the inconsistency. Uh, so, in general, I'm not a huge fan of breaking the fourth wall. I liked the version of Fleabag in my head a lot more than the one on the screen, although I did very much like the one on the screen. But at least that was consistent with the structure and the style that it set out. Um, Here, it doesn't seem like the rules are very clear. So this might seem incredibly nitpicky, but I guess this is what we do. Where a character, John C. Reilly's character, Dr. Buss, will break the fourth wall, and then another character on screen also gets access to that, but it's unclear who has it and at what time, and who is overhearing uh, that narration. So the confusion of that is really annoying because it doesn't seem like as much care went into establishing the rules of that. And maybe I watched that incorrectly. I wasn't paying enough attention. If I went back to see it, then it would make more sense and everything would be justified. But in watching it the first time, it didn't seem like that was very clear, which is annoying.
Well, I wouldn't say, I am not of the belief. There are certainly wrong ways to consume television. I think in this day and age, we learn more and more from people that have platforms on the internet that there is certainly a wrong way to consume your entertainment properties. But I think we can safely list you on the right side of that conversation. Um,
Sorry to cut you off before your next thought, but it brings up a point which I guess feels like to me it should be made.
is it a 3-pointer?
If I had a soundboard at my feet, you would be able to hear it now. Um, I don't. I'm not convinced that this is for us, which is really sad to say because the subject matter absolutely is. Uh, we both love basketball and love television, so it would make sense that a series that has taken itself seriously in terms of craft, at least, that is about basketball, especially such a important segment of basketball history, of NBA history at least, uh, would be right up our alley. But what I mean by maybe it's not for us is in that execution. Maybe I'd have to talk to, I don't know how you would phrase it. The phrase that came to mind is the average viewer, but there is no average viewer. But I'd like to talk to a lot more people who did respond positively to this and see, all right, well, what are the kinds of shows that they tend to like? How do they watch television? Because I'm wondering if this is not for us and it's for a more general, non-critical audience, more in the vein of fun. Uh, Was that pulled off well? Did those people who aren't looking at it in the same way as we are enjoy those aspects, the breaking of the fourth wall, the filters, the overextension to establish the era? Because I'm not convinced either way, which is not a good sign. Usually, when I see something that's not for me, I can see why it would be appealing to the other people. But I'm not sure about that. Right now, it seems like it's banking on the goodwill of people are going to be interested in this anyway because it's about the Showtime Lakers, and eventually stuff is going to happen that's going to be great and that people are going to talk about on Twitter in the same way that people talked about Game of Thrones week to week on Twitter. Uh, but I'm not seeing any evidence that this is even catering to those people yet.
So that's the thing about this show is like Winning Time is presents itself as one of these modern shows that's we've got something for everybody. You like fourth wall breaking? Well, guess what? Every character's Fleabag. You want a show that's got capital S style? Guess what? We've got not one but two different film filters we're going to throw at that ass. You want a show that like does the Adam McKay thing of superficially addressing socio-economic and political conditions of the era? Well, guess what? The trailer for the season suggests that we might do that for 2 or 3 minutes in one episode. Of course, I'm not going to judge episodes we haven't seen, but this is one of those shows that certainly opens as a show that wants to be something for everybody, but ends up being nothing to anyone because that lack of commitment to one identity or the other undercuts so much of what it's trying to do in either the comedic or dramatic lane. Like this show opens after this just does the thing that every other show does now where it's in media res. Let's cut to the end of the story or somewhere 2/3 of the way through the story, and guess what? Magic Johnson's about to find out he has HIV. But nope, we got to cut back to the beginning now. Then he turns to the camera and says, now we're going to go back to the beginning of the story. And then it's this bright like comedy that's trying to move through this and understand this era of the late 70s, which I don't necessarily think it captures that tone very well, but it also kind of, I don't know. I know this show's not trying to be historical, but my nitpicky thing, my nitpicky moment of this episode is that it kind of doesn't really set the context for where the NBA was properly, I think, because the 70s and the 80s are when like labor movements and leagues started to happen. 1979 was what, 2 or 3 years after the two leagues, the NBA and the ABA, had merged. So like the NBA was coming out of that merger with new teams in the league. It had gone through expansion. And I think it's been pretty clear looking back that from that time period, the league has pretty much gone through a continuous level of growth. And so like painting basketball as something that had like absolutely no influence over the culture and was just something in the background, it like goes in contrast with things like Norm Nixon wearing a Fox jacket at the Playboy Mansion or wherever that party was. And I don't know, it feels like at least early on, like the show can't get out of its own way. When it does, and it's telling stories like, the intergenerational like dissonance between Magic and his father and their circumstances. Like this is a much more interesting show, or even a show about Jerry Buss, a guy who clearly the show is given like a very large personality, and the idea of this bulldozing Hollywood personality bringing a new identity to a league that's trying to find itself is really interesting, and where it intersects with Black culture is really interesting. There's a note in here where we touch on Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, taking on a Muslim name. Lou Alcindor is what he's referred to by most people in society. Like, there's hints of a really, really good show here, and like, there's one great scene in this episode where Magic is in the hotel room with his dad, and they're talking about like what kind of people, what kind of person Magic is going to become, what kind of man he's going to be, and boy, if only I wasn't worried that Magic was going to look at the camera at some point in that scene and say, "Guess what? I'm here to bounce some basketballs." Whatever the fuck he was going to say. Like, just the fear of that happening, like, and this show not understanding who it is, I think makes it very hard for, like, I just can't see a general audience getting like super excited about this show because it's not committing to any one thing.
Saying that it has a little bit of everything is right on point. You also get there's a percentage of people which I would imagine is not a meaningless percentage who only know Abdul Jabbar from his role in Airplane, and they pay tribute to that in this first episode. They do again another overextension just to make sure that the audience is aware that the show is aware of all of the racism happening at this point. You're beaten
Oh
over
my
the head with that.
god, the when they're talking about Larry Bird and Magic Johnson and they're literally like flashing the words white and black across the screen 40 times, it's like take a fucking hint. Like a note of subtlety here would go a long way. Like you don't like we're the it's funny because I saw an interview after this where Adam McKay was like, audiences are sophisticated enough to understand what's going on. Then it's like, why does this entire pilot feel the need to fucking over explain everything, especially the racial dynamics of America in the late 1970s?
Comparing something like that to how a character like Donald Sterling is introduced is a
Oh my
good
god.
way to show, I suppose, the difference.
Shoot me.
It's it's worse for us who know who he is and why he's famous at this point. I guess for people who don't know anything about that world, um, I don't know. You said shoot me, so you have feelings about just that very brief scene.
I have feelings about the text on screen of calling him the second worst Donald of the 80s.
Oh, I see. I
Like,
completely
oh,
forgot
for
about that. Yeah,
fuck's
yeah, yeah.
sake, man! Like, get over. Like, I understand Donald Sterling's going to be a character. Like, it's the other problem with the show is that it needs its like funny characters to be characters, but then it has like serious stuff going on too. And like, boy, does that not work when you introduce a character and you're already being like, oh, Donald Trump sucks. Like, yeah, we fucking get it, dude. We did this. We've done this for so long. Can we like stop doing this in entertainment with everything?
You make a very good point, I think, and it's something I'm glad you remembered that because I had forgotten that's what shows up on the screen. Even though it's the title of this episode that I can now see at the top of this page. So that's on me. But if McKay is saying audiences are smart enough to this or that, then you can't put that there for the introduction of the character because that gives no leeway, that gives no autonomy to the viewer whatsoever. You now have to acknowledge, all right, whoever this person is, they're a shitty person, so I'm going to be aware of that and keep that in the back of my head going forward, that look out for this person doing crappy things at some point. And that's kind of a weird prototypical spoiler, I guess. I don't know. It's a poor narrative decision, first of all, but yeah, I think like on the meta level, it's also quite bad. So that's surprising that you would say that McKay said that, and I don't know if that's something that he's touting as something that's important, or if it was just an offhand comment on one interview done out of dozens and dozens of interviews. I don't know, but it's it's not reassuring. Um, So this is why I wanted to get this part out of the way, I suppose, is because I feel like these stylistic things, they'll be easy to,
We have to come to terms with it now. We have to air our grievances. We have to accept it.
yeah.
We have to accept things on. We have to accept shows on their own terms. But here's just a note in general for screenwriters and directors. If you are going to make a joke or make a reference that you would normally like, if you were to like something, if somebody could take a screenshot of it and it's something that Deborah Messing would retweet, don't make the joke. That's my
Oh
general
man,
tip. Okay. Just we can do better than that. Okay.
I'm gonna throw out some statistics for you because you mentioned Vinyl earlier, and that was a series which came into my head as well as I was watching this. So the pilot of Vinyl, which aired in February of
Was
2016,
that
actually,
Terrence Winter? Did he direct that?
Martin Scorsese did.
He actually directed the pilot. Okay, I couldn't
He
remember.
did, yeah. So about a month ago during 2016. So that got um,
Oh, we missed the 5-year anniversary.
we did 764,000 people, and the pilot for Winning Time got 256,000. So almost exactly a third of vinyl. And granted, how we view television is different now, so I'm not sure if those initial numbers.
Yeah, but vinyl showed the cocaine on the table.
I'm not sure if those numbers take into account HBO Max and people watching it at various times, or if it's only during the live Sunday night airings for HBO. But regardless, that's also not a good sign, and it also speaks to maybe something that HBO is trying to tap into that perhaps isn't really working, and it's uh, this need or this desire to go after, I don't know what adjective you would use to call the subject matter, not racy, but flashy period pieces, which are actually quite niche despite what they may think. And it's got to be accounting for some of the low viewership. I don't think that this is, them trying to chase after the success of Game of Thrones and have the next big thing. This seems like it's an in-house brand kind of series. But I wonder at this point if the in-house brand just isn't really bringing in people, if it's not interesting them enough.
Well, look, Sean, we have another Game of Thrones series coming. Don't worry. House of the Dragon is people. I see stories about it, so it's happening. Not that we actually give a shit about it, but besides the point. I think we can wrap up our discussion of the first episode of Winning Time, of talking time, of Winning Time, basketball time, crossover dribble. Um, with I do want to mention a couple of things that I do like. As I mentioned, I think there's some really strong performances and a really strong story about Magic and his father, and kind of tracing the arc of Irving Johnson and how he became Magic Johnson, and that kind of there's people forget now as these this the old dad who has the very famous gay son, and is big on doing goofy dad shit on Twitter, and owns baseball teams and shit. Like, Magic Johnson was a cultural force whose HIV status changed our culture. And like there's a tragedy to his story that I'm not sure this show is equipped to handle that arc. But if there's a way that this show is going to bridge that gap between comedy and drama, the way it's going to do it through his character. And I think they certainly have the right actor for it. They certainly have, you don't cast John C. Riley unless you're looking for somebody who can be extremely versatile in a lead performance. And so there's still plenty of hope for me that this show can find itself. It's not super encouraging, like you said, the audience numbers. Adam McKay is a producer. The Many of these scripts are still written by people that were involved with the scripting of the pilot, so there needs to be some refinement. But boy, do I wish this show would be good. And there's just enough of it here that I am interested to see where things go. And of course, like, Adrian Brody as Pat Riley is something that I have to see. That I'm a human being. Okay, I have to see these things.
Yeah, tonally is where I'm most interested to see what this show does. The dramatic beats are working a lot better for me so far than the boogie nightsness of the series, and that's not even just the John C. Riley factor. It's also that there was the Playboy Mansion and all the stylistic stuff is taking some influence from that, I would
HBO
guess.
CEO of Tits cashed a paycheck this week.
Damn right. But like you said, some things I have to see, and we've already decided to see this through to the end. So it'll either be very painful for both of us and anybody listening to this, or optimism will win out, and there'll be things that storylines, performances that we can really dive into as we go along. The cast for this is unreasonable, but then you could have said the same thing about Vinyl or The Deuce, and these are shows that a lot of people forgot aired on HBO.
Yeah. Who knows? Will it be a slam dunk? Will it be a turnover? Will it pull off a buzzer beater? We will find out over the next 9 weeks. Pretty sure that these segments moving forward will air separately from our regular episodes, but in the same feed as we've done with stuff like the After Dark episodes. But yeah, Winning Time on HBO. Gonna Yeah, if I had to put a grade on it, I'd probably say about a safe C plus, but closer to a B minus than a C. Like even if your style doesn't vibe with me, I can appreciate a show that goes for it.
C sounds about right.
I think it's important to move a little bit every day. Stretch. Yeah! What? Welcome to Painting with John Season 2, the show where I do not teach you how to paint.
All right. Well, across the sea and down the Caribbean we go to the second season, staying on the same network though, which again I think speaks to how HBO be doing TV right, even when it don't be doing TV great.
The CEO of Tits does not get a paycheck for this one.
He does not get a paycheck here, unfortunately, but Painting with John, for those who don't know, is John Lurie's the latest season of his HBO show, which is kind of the companion series to his early 90s oddity, Fishing with John, which I remember mostly from seeing in a film class in college. And the pilot episode, the one with Jim Jarmusch, he actually fishes in the Montauk River, which is where I caught my first fish as a child. Kind of fun. But John Lurie, if you don't know who John Lurie is, I don't know who the fuck you are. The guy he's one of those guys that's done everything. Been an actor, he's been a musician, he's worked with Jarmusch, and he was in Last Temptation of the Christ, Scorsese's movie. He was on Oz for a number of seasons. He spent most of his time in solitary, and it was kind of towards the end of his public facing career. He has chronic Lyme disease and moved to the Caribbean, some unknown place in the Caribbean under strange circumstances some time ago. And during the pandemic, he started filming a kind of a sequel, not really a sequel series, but a companion show called Painting with John, where he paints shit and tells story about life. And it's all about, as somebody whose concentration and whose real focus during my studious years was in memoir and in creative nonfiction. Painting with John is, about as much up my alley a show can probably be. Like a show that's kind of artistically up its own ass, but also like extremely contemplative, but in a way that's both talkative and very quiet. Painting with John is a show that's about, it's about a guy doing art and thinking about his life, but it's also very much about blurring the lines between reality and memory. And also, what I think comes through in a lot of his art, this really interesting dynamic between, like, I know I'm touching on a lot of stuff here. I'm very sorry, Sean. Uh, the like his creatures, the animals in his art are very rigid, and his like the objects are very structured, but the nature in his art I think really stands out, and it flows and it moves and it takes up these huge cavernous spaces. And I think it's really interesting, like this guy who kind of lives in the middle of nowhere in the Caribbean and spends all this time kind of just hanging out, um, how he approaches like the rigidity of the human experience and how we recall that with how nature just kind of fucking goes with it. And it makes for a really fascinating kind of 20-minute meditation to end your week with.
For those who don't know about Fishing with John, I would highly recommend seeking that out.
It's on Criterion. It's like one of the only TV shows they have.
There's a Criterion DVD of it. I don't know if you can still get it from Criterion directly. You might have to get it on eBay. But there is a hard release of it. And it's quite different from this. Fishing with John is much more comedic.
He dies in one of the episodes.
And then he comes back.
Yes.
There's also a big name celebrity in each of the episodes, so there's something that's going to be of interest to you if you know any of those people. The last two episodes, the two-parter with Dennis Hopper, rest in peace. But structurally, tonally, very different from Painting with John. I didn't even know that Painting with John existed until after its first season had aired completely, so I didn't watch it at the time and only watched it after the fact. And surely enough, when we were thinking about future episodes for the next few months, I had forgotten that the second season was going to drop. So I'm glad that we did this. And it makes sense and feels appropriate for me because Fishing with John is, I hesitate to say a wide appeal. I feel even though it's more accessible than Painting with John, it's still probably a bit too much for some people.
It's got Dennis Hopper, though.
If you don't like really irreverent and absurd comedy like Tim and Eric, if even the names Tim and Eric kind of create a bad reflex in your body, then maybe
get the fuck out of here.
Maybe Fishing with John isn't going to be your thing.
But you can find it, just to note, it is available on YouTube. So if you want to check it out, there's a pretty low stakes way. You don't have to hunt down the Criterion DVDs.
But why it feels appropriate to me is that you can mention Fishing with John, and I'm like, oh man, let's watch from Fishing with John. Like that's my reaction. But with Painting with John, watching it has always it's only been this last year. Watching it feels more like I need to be in the mood.
It's this. A vibe.
Yeah, it's exactly
very much a different vibe too. I call it a companion show to Painting with John, to Fishing with John, because it has that same like surrealist undercurrent that it's just driven in a different direction here. And it's, I read a story once about how when John found out that a doctor told him he had a year to live at one point, like he started writing so much that he went into this brain fog for a while. And I feel like this show is him like reaching a hand out to other human beings and saying like, let's try and find a bit of clarity together, but like, let's have fun with it.
One thing I definitively think this is not is a look into the head of John Lurie. I haven't read any of the reviews, and I'm worried that people will have used that phrase or that wording, which often gets used with stuff that isn't immediately accessible. So with a director like David Lynch, for instance, it's very strange material. And so some people who don't know how to interact with that kind of strange material, one way of them having it make sense to them is to say, oh, this is like a look inside David Lynch's head about this specific topic or whatever it is. I don't think that Painting with John is that at all. And I don't think that he's set out to make anything particular. So when I say that Fishing with John is quite funny and Painting with John is not, that's not to say that the first is more enjoyable. But if there's funny stuff in Painting with John, and there is, I think, that's not the reason for the show existing. It comes down to these, again, fourth wall breaking, but in this case, it's a lot more appropriate given that it's not scripted. These fourth wall breaking moments where John is telling a story about something that's happened, or maybe something that hasn't happened, or maybe something that has happened and he's purposely changing some of the facts about it.
Like going back to back with another kid while coins fall out of each other's noses, but different denominations of coin.
Exactly. Like that's a story that you can't take literally because it is impossible. But then you get a story, him talking about giving a talk about technology in Paris, and the whole thing goes to shit, and aspects of it feel like they're
gotta have hamburgers spread out across a highway.
But some of it feels very real. And that's part of the experience, I think. So rather than it being a look inside John Lurie's head, it feels more like an artistic expression of, I suppose, attention or trains of thoughts, how we move from one idea to the other. You talked about the blending of memoir and fiction, and I think that that's something that seems like it would be very interesting to Lurie based on what little I know of him, and maybe this is not the case. Uh, but as somebody who is capital A artistic and has to work in different mediums because that interest can't be contained just within one. Um, I find it fascinating and I find it really enjoyable. But again, it is a vibe, and I could see why this wouldn't be some people's thing. And yeah, it's a success because it doesn't try to engage those people in any way. I don't think John Lurie is interested in appealing to anybody. He's just doing a show that he wants to do. It's very explicit. At the end of one of these episodes, says that thanks for the money, HBO, which is fantastic. And it's just doing something that feels right. It's essentially giving this person and his friend a camera, and then the two people who are living. I don't know if they live in his house permanently or if it's they're there during working hours or whatever it might be, and just whatever comes out of it. It's not really. I don't know if what we're doing right now is really criticism. It's more just observation, but I'm here for it, and I'm surprised that it got the second season after only watching the first season a few months ago. And I'm glad that it did, because stuff like this is why I'm here for any sort of entertainment, I suppose. Not this specific show directly, but Painting with John represents, and Fishing with John represent, like, real creative imagination and inquiry. And sometimes if you trace that inquiry, the end result isn't very interesting and not very good, and that's fine. I think we've said multiple times in the past on this podcast, or at least I have, that I'm way more interested in an interesting failure rather than a very safe success. And I don't think this is either of those things. I think, to me, this is a success and it is interesting. But yeah, I guess I'm just glad that he's been given this chance to do this, that HBO is behind him to some extent, and that he's managed to find a way to incorporate multiple mediums and genres of art that he's interested in. Because I know that he can't really work in some of them in the same ways that he used to, which has got to be painful, which is why some of the stories that are told across this series so far are really melancholic. But it would be ridiculous to suggest that somebody lives a life in which that is not the case.
I was thinking about that and thinking about like how like all of the things that John Lurie's done. I mean, this is the guy who wrote the theme song to the Conan show, along with the acting that he did. He was like big in like the avant-garde jazz scene in the late 70s, and I was thinking about his music career a lot in particular because there's some of his music that he integrates into the score of the show. And I know that this season there was even a clip in one episode of him actually recording music like currently, which was cool to see. um and knowing that this is like a real label for him too. He's talked about how like he can only really film for a couple hours a day and do this stuff in little bursts at a time. um it does feel like a creative expression of somebody considering their kind of existence as a whole. Like this reminds me a lot of his music because it's like you said, it's sometimes it's melancholic, it's perfectly content going to these weird strange places on a whim, but it's all built on this very familiar, obviously this guy's worked with Jarmusch and Lynch and is friends with them both, and I think there are elements to both of those, their work and their influence on this. I think even the way he just shoots his interviews reminds me of how Lynch will film, monologues with some characters in his films. It reminds me a lot of The Straight Story in a lot of weird ways, oddly enough. um, but it's got that structure, but it's not afraid to go off that. Like great jazz does. Great jazz comes from a place of supreme education and understanding that you're okay. You're confident to try something, even if it might not work. It might sound weird. It might be dissonant for a few minutes, or it might be in this beautiful harmony for 5 minutes, and then everything else around it has no connection to it. And I think this show embraces that with a wholeheartedness that I don't know if I would call it like you said, it's not stylistically brave, but there is a creative honesty to it that is, I think it's a real perfect comparison point for this first episode of Winning Time, because Winning Time is also a show that is shot and delivered and scored trying to establish a vibe. And the thing is that Winning Time doesn't know what its vibe is. And John Lurie has spent his entire life like finding his own vibe in a way and finding that rhythm. And like this just feels like a culmination of that. And it makes for maybe not a show that you're gonna walk away from and think about for weeks at a time, but it's going to be a show that has a bigger effect on you as a human than I think you would expect from a regular TV show.
Just wanted to add that. What did you say about the best kind of jazz?
The best kind of jazz comes from the best jazz musicians. Oftentimes, not universal, of course, are people that are extremely like it's like heavy. It's like metal. They come from people that are extremely educated in like classical musical structures and how harmonies are supposed to be devised and how scales are built, and then they just for these little pockets completely throw it out the fucking window and just do it on a whim and it works.
God damn it, you gave me like a very genuine answer. I was trying to set it up so that I could respond back with, well, actually, good kind of jazz comes from Utah.
Ah, son of a bitch. I killed it. I'm sorry.
That's
That was a
okay.
turnover on that was a
Hey,
that
we
was a
got
big
one of them.
turnover.
One of them naturally. I'll definitely be watching the rest of the season and however much HBO allows him to make. But as we've said, it may not necessarily be a week to week kind of thing. This is more of a late nighttime after after we've hit the bong kind of thing. Not that you need to do that to appreciate it, but I feel like knowing the state that I'm in when I'm like that, I'm more receptive to some of the emotional undercurrent of some of this stuff, which is difficult to pick up on sometimes when something is a bit weird and how it's presented.
And I think there's two things I think to close off our conversation that I think are really intelligent about the show. There are too many podcasts in the world, and this show is able to serve that function in a much more artistic way. Like this is a show that you can when John is telling one of his stories, you can look away from the screen for a moment, and John trusts you to listen to him and what he's saying, because he's gonna take that story in a direction at some point, and if you don't keep up with it, you're gonna lose the thread. And I think that's the genius of how he tells some of his stories, and leans back on like what I think great memoir is built from, is from a place of like imperfect memory. I really love this show. I think again, like many of the shows that we love the most, it's not a show that is for a lot of people, but if you're willing to be open to a show and meet it on its level, like there's there's really something here. There's also something to be said, I think, for TV that you can wind down to, which I think is a genre that has been lost amongst the Bel Airs and the Winning Times of the world that must scream at us at every moment what they are about in capital letters.
We will not be talking about Bel Air.
Somebody record that for the day when the day comes and we were talking about the season 2 finale of Bel Air 4 years from now and the post-apocalyptic hellscape that we'll be living in. But spoilers for the future. I think that's about it for this week. Sean, anything else going on? You experiencing any other types of art that you would like to talk about?
Oh god, I could talk about video games right now for a very long time, and I won't. What I will say is that I occasionally
I'll
go
give you
on.
the floor for a minute or two, though. What do you got?
I Let me get to this first because it's important because it's another thing that both of us hold dear, and that's hip hop. Although I'm not sure what your opinion on this is going to be, given that any opinions about Kanye West are clouded by the fact that we're talking about Kanye West.
Whew.
Um, Take all that baggage,
Okay.
throw it out the window.
Okay.
One of the things that I did read on Twitter recently was an interview that he gave and said that he thinks that both 808s and Heartbreak and Yeezus are much better albums than My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. And I'm really glad that he came out and said that. I've been a huge proponent of Yeezus since it released and thought this is one of the most interesting mainstream hip hop albums that I've heard in quite a long time. And I've not begrudged My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy for being as highly rated as it is. It's very good, but I don't think it's his best album. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, so let's pull up a list. Let's rank Kanye albums real quick. I can do this
Oh
quickly.
god, this is so exciting for me. Actually,
We'll only do mainstream albums. Like I have so many of his old mixtapes and stuff. I won't go into any of that. But okay, so I will go worst to best. Worst, Donda. I don't like Donda at all. Wait, no, Jesus is King is worse than Donda. Donda has a couple good beats on it. Jesus is King, I do not like. Yay is down there. Basically, you can take whatever pick you like of Kanye's last three albums. They're at the bottom. Life of Pablo is also at the bottom, but kind of slightly a tier above that. That album he did with Jay-Z, I'm not even going to talk about that. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, I would probably put in kind of the next mid tier with like it's the second half of registration that I of graduation that I don't really like. Is graduation, no, yeah, yeah, graduation's fine. I'm gonna put My Dark Twisted Fantasy below that. I'm gonna go graduation. I'm gonna go college dropout. I'm gonna go 808s and heartbreaks. I'm gonna go late registration at the top. I think that's
late
everything. Oh wait,
registration at
wait.
the
I'm
top.
gonna go. Man, late registration and Yeezus are very. God, they're such different vibes. I'd have to think about that.
Yeah, looking at the albums, I'm not sure I could do this.
Those are
You have
my
to.
three top tiers, though, or like the absolute top tier. I think College Dropout has some like probably his most memorable tracks, but I think he perfects what he was doing with that album on late registration. I think the production on late registration is fucking nuts. Um, I think Graduations is a good vibe album. That was a good album to have out in college, but it's not the greatest album. And 808s and Heartbreaks is fucking magic, man. That's a great album.
It is. Those first three are all sort of. Um, they they form a kind of trilogy, I guess. It's working up towards the big stadium album that Graduation is, but I think that there's the songwriting in all three of those. There are some similarities, and those three feel of a unit and removed from everything else that comes afterwards. So I guess that's what makes it tough for me to try to rank them. I could rank them like within their little tiers, but I'm not sure. All I know is that Yeezus would be number one for me, and
Jesus is the only album I like outside of that trio and 808s. Really, I don't really care for any of his other albums outside of that. They're all so indulgent at some
I
point.
probably would put My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy right after Yeezus, but I don't know. 808s is very good. I like Life of
How many
Pablo.
times do you listen to those 9 minute songs all the way through? I think that's
Uh, I've listened to Runaway all the
okay.
time,
Okay, like that's. God damn it.
and Devil in a New Dress, although that's a little bit less.
There's a lot of songs on that album I don't really like. It's been a while since I've listened to that one, but Jesus is. I think without Rick Rubin, I wonder if that album would have been as good as it was. But hey, we got the album we got, and it's awesome.
And people loved it, and that's great. And it allowed him to do Yeezus in some way, so I can be thankful for that.
Wonderful. Um, well, yeah, I guess before we close out, we got a couple minutes before we need to run. What's going on in your video game world?
Well, as you know, Nintendo announced the eventual closures of the Wii U and the 3DS eShop. So
R.I.P.
I have two 3DSs. That's okay. Because of what Nintendo did with all of the names of these revisions, that's not technically true. I have a new 2DS and a new 3DS. And
So you
my
have the 2DS. That's the one big one chunk.
no, this is the UK one, which is still it opens. It looks like a 3DS. It just doesn't have the
Oh, it's the
3D.
2DS XL.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Ah,
yeah.
okay. Yes, that was the one I had.
Yeah. So I have these two and one other one that I inherited from my brother because he's moved on from it. Um, and so I'm just really trying to collect all of the stuff that hasn't seen a release elsewhere, just in case they decide not to re-release them on future consoles or anything like that. And in doing so, obviously, I'm going back to play a lot of it. So a lot of virtual console stuff for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, Game Gear. The virtual console on the 3DS for the Game Gear was the first time I got to play Game Gear games. And I had a friend who had a Game Gear as a kid. I never did, and that was one of the consoles that I never went back to get after
It's
the
okay.
fact.
It took like 48 fucking batteries. That dumb thing.
That was a big reason for
And the
me and
games
never
look like
wanting to get it.
shit.
Yeah, so it's been a lot of that, and
God, the Game Gear. What a device.
yeah, yeah, and some Switch stuff. I haven't done the Kirby demo yet. I'm still not sure if I am or if I'm just going to get
You're
the
trying to
actual game
maintain your purity.
on day one. Yeah. So we'll see. In the lead up to that, I've been playing a bunch of Kirby games as well. So one's outside of the virtual console too.
Damn. Everybody out there in the world is playing Elden Ring. I'm doing license tests in Gran Turismo 7, which is basically doing an Elden Ring boss 45 times over and over.
Tell me just a little bit about Gran Turismo. I've never gotten into any of the realistic or simulated racing series, Forza, Gran Turismo, anything like that. I played some of them. I mean, the one that I played the most was probably 3 on the PS2, Gran Turismo 3 A hyphen spec. I don't remember exactly what it was called. But it's the genre that I don't know. I've never really gotten much out of. So what's been your experience with it?
Uh, car go fast and look very pretty.
Vroom
Um,
vroom.
the tires are so fucking round. Um, I don't know. It's interesting to think about like what my appeal to racing games have been through my lifetime because I mean I've experienced all of them at some point. You know, I own Need for Speed games on the PlayStation 1 and owned played the shit out of both discs of Gran Turismo 2 and I've played Forza games and I've played Mario Kart and like I still contend that the first Sonic and Sega All-Stars racing game is better than Mario Kart 64 and Double
Oh,
Dash.
there's so much pain going through my
Uh,
body right now.
um, but maybe not Double Dash. Double Dash is really good. I don't know. I like the aspect of like understanding the physics of movement that come with that. Like there's a rhythm to driving a car that has realistic like turning and braking physics that's very rewarding once you figure it out. Like driving is fun and a game that can capture that feeling of like fucking gassing it around the corner without the extra drama of wondering if I'm going to lose control and crash into a tree is fun. And I think I have some quibbles about how Gran Turismo like sets up some of its races and stuff and how some of its AI is designed, but it feels good. And I think that's the most important part of a racing game and fuck it looks good. Like you know, usually with most games, like a sports game, you see a couple replays, a couple home runs or dunks or whatever, and then you're like, okay, I'm just gonna X past this. I just want to play the game part. I watch a lot. I don't get a lot done in that game because boy, do I watch the replays. It's fucking gorgeous. Now I'm playing on PS5, and the replays you can set to have ray tracing on and all that shit. And, oh my god, it looks so nice.
Does it have a mouthful mode?
It does not have a mouthful mode, which is the most. But I think, you know, I think there would probably be a way to paint a because you can make your own liveries on for the cars. I think there would be a way to paint one that you can make it look like you were in mouthful mode. I might have to try that.
You just said you're in mouthful mode.
Yes, I did because I'm an adult and this podcast is sexy, if nothing else. Um, Gaming. Yeah, I think that's about it. I'm still playing Horizon. I'm not. I enjoy the story of that, but there's so much fucking bullshit in that game. It's kind of exhausting. Um, but yeah, I've been enjoying watching. I did my best of February article at Process Media and talked about how I've been enjoying watching other people play Elden Ring because I know that if I play that game, I am going to punch a hole through my television. And I'm an adult and I know what I like.
We do not need holes pumped through televisions.
No. What we do need to do is end this podcast and go enjoy some more television. So, for Sean and myself, that is this week's episode of the show. We will be back on Monday with our next episode of Talking Time basketball time / cocaine cowboys podcast extravaganza slam dunk. Uh,
Rise of the midseason replacements dynasty.
Yes, rise of the midseason replacements dynasty. Off the bench with the midseason replacements. We're brainstorming. We're getting there. But we'll have that as a named episode next week, and then we'll be back sometime soon to talk about whatever we're going to talk about next. Until then, be well and enjoy television. Thanks for listening.